I'm Emily Mathis-Kubin, and I'm an NCJW board director. I'm very excited to welcome you to our NCJW Webinars leadership series. This series is open exclusively to our leadership network and dedicated to creating an online space to connect, learn together, and provide leadership training and skills. We're very excited to learn with our partners at Greater Good Strategy today about donor engagement and journey mapping. In the next hour, we'll discuss how to create a communications experience that moves our target donors from first becoming aware of NCJW through making the decision to become a donor. We're really glad you're able to join us today. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. You'll notice that everyone's mics are muted. This is to prevent background noise or feedback. You're welcome to unmute during the group discussions, and we'll let you know when it's time to do that. Feel free to write questions down or drop them in the chat box as we go along, and we'll have time to review them at the end. Write in the chat if you're experiencing ongoing technical issues, but please forgive us if we don't get to that right away, because you'll note our limited capacity to address issues exists while the webinar is actually running. Please also note we're recording the webinar, as we just learned from Samantha, and we'll upload it to our website to share with those who cannot attend today in person. Also list your name and section in your Zoom name, as we just discussed. And for those of you who are late joining us, you can find the little drop-down menu near your picture and rename yourself to include that information. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce our trainers from Greater Good Strategy. The national office has worked with this team to support our digital marketing and fundraising efforts, specifically for the NCJW Advocates launch in 2019, end-of-year fundraising, and email and list growth strategy. Liz O'Mara Goldberg is a senior strategist at Greater Good Strategy. She is a strategic and thoughtful consultant with more than 15 years of experience in marketing and communication strategy, planning, and implementation. Her specialties are audience-focused messaging, content marketing, brand engagement, media strategy, and revenue development. Liz works with organizations to use marketing and communications tools to grow their audience, their revenue, and their impact. Erica Muchler is a content marketing, fundraising, loving strategist. She has more than a decade of communication and nonprofit fundraising experience. She's committed to helping businesses and nonprofits find their voices, establish their messages, and share their stories with clients and constituents. We're very pleased to welcome Liz and Erica today to lead us in this important session. Liz.
Thank you so much, Emily and Samantha and Lindsay and the team at NCJW for having us here today. And thank you all for joining. I know we've all, I'm sure, have a busy schedule of Zoom meetings all day, every day. And so I just thank you for being here. We're super excited to join you today. I know you have we're not quite as exciting as your Stacey Abrams webinar tomorrow, but we'll try to make it jazzy. Erica and I are really excited to be here. As Emily mentioned, Erica and I together have worked with the team at NCJW on the national level on a few engagements now. And, we've heard a lot about your sections and a lot about your leadership in really great ways. And we're just really excited to get a chance to work with you on this. So I'm really excited to be here. Erica, do you want to say anything before we get started?
Oh, just the same. So excited to be here. Thank you for having us.
Great, thanks. So we just wanted to spend a second going over the agenda today, if that works for everyone, just so we know what to expect. And I know Samantha and Lindsay sent out some materials ahead of time, so those will be really helpful. But so today we're going to talk about the process of imagining a donor, especially an online donor's engagement with the organization. So from the first time that they hear about NCJW and your particular section to the point at which they make a donation and become a really valuable member of your community. We'll talk about we're going to cover a lot today, so let's just start there. We will talk about the different sort of parts that are key to this engagement journey. One is personas and audience profiles, actually figuring out who you are talking to as you're thinking about digital fundraising. We're going to talk about the journeys themselves. What is a digital fundraising journey and why are they important? Then we really wanted to make this interactive. I know that you all have, different organizations, you're working with a different number of people, you have different resources. So we wanted to make this as specific to you all as possible. But we're going to break out into different groups and start with a brainstorm so that you can sort of see how this works. And then ideally what we want you to do is walk away with the process so that you can go back to your own section and apply it specifically to you all. So it's going to feel a little broad today, I think, but the goal is to teach you how to do this so that you can apply it on your own. So you'll work together in small groups to actually develop an engagement journey. And then we'll come back, everyone will, or not everyone, but those who want to will report back. And then we'll just talk quickly about how you can actually use this. So what to do with this information moving forward. And again, how to sort of apply that to your section. I think the question of, why is this important? And Lindsay, if you could advance to the next slide, that would be, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, great. So who is your target audience is the next thing we're going to talk about. And Erica is going to talk about those audience profiles that you all received ahead of time.
Thank you. So let's start with the basics. What is a target audience? I think everyone received these sample audiences before. And as Liz shared, we developed these in partnership with the national office. So not all of them will be a perfect fit for your section, but let's just talk about the basics of what a target audience is. I think in some ways it can seem really simple, and in some ways, as we start digging into the details, it can be overwhelming. It's who you're talking to, right? But the purpose of creating these profiles is to create an imaginary person who helps you really wrap your arms around who you're talking to. So, we typically recommend 3 so that you have a very good cross-section of who you're talking to. So we're going to cover 3 today. But it helps you just imagine what these people could look like, what motivates them, what engages them, and what is going to inspire them to, in this case, make a donation to your sections. So that's the basics of target audience. And if we could go to the next slide, we'll dig into the specifics of each audience so that we can get into the journeys, what will actually get them to action. So the first audience that we're going to talk about is Irene. And I'm going to cover the demographics of each of these audiences, and then we'll talk about how we use them to make the journeys. So this is Irene. She's 70. She has 2 kids and 6 grandchildren. She's Jewish and retired. She's a retired teacher. Household income is definitely an important piece for fundraising, but you'll see that a lot of these are for major donors, and so they might not be the right incomes for each section, for section audiences. And so we'll provide all the resources for you to map out a section audience or multiple for your own sections. But for the purposes of this one, feel free to edit the income if it's not appropriate. So she pre-retirement was making around $750,000 and has capacity to make a $50,000 gift. In terms of where she is on the internet, Irene is using Facebook, and she reads a little bit more on Instagram, but uses it less. She's an iPad user and frequently uses phone and of course email interspersed in there. News sources is another great place to see where your audience is. It might not be a two-way communication street like email, but it's a great place to see where you might be able to place an ad or where you might begin a conversation with the right audience. So we've got a couple news sources for Irene, which range from local all the way to Facebook and cable news. And then, of course, one of the most important things for you all, relationship to NCJW. She's a section member, she's a volunteer, and then we've got her focus issue areas in addition to, which are listed there, in addition to anti-Semitism, sex trafficking, Israel, pro-women, and that she went to the Women's March with her section. And these are really helpful when you get into the journeys, considering what do you say about NCJW? There's so much to discuss and there's so much activity that you have, but when you think about their relationship or the main motivators, which are listed below, you can get as specific as, this is what we did related to reproductive health, and know that it will inspire some of your target audiences. So then we've got main motivators here, which vary based on age and demographics. So that's Irene. So can we go to the next slide, please? This is Melissa. She's 42. She has one daughter who's 11. She's a lawyer, and her household income is about $550,000. When you get into where Melissa is, it's a little bit different than Irene. She reads only on Twitter, doesn't post. She keeps a tight-knit circle of friends on Facebook and is an active Instagram user, as well as an active podcast listener. And email is best for her. That's where she reads most often, and she's most likely to respond. She's got news sources, which are largely large publications and legal trade publications. And her relationship to NCJW is that she's very familiar with federal court work, as she's a lawyer herself and has been interested in getting more involved in the Jewish community as she begins to prepare for her daughter's bat mitzvah. And we've got one more profile here. This is Jenna. She's 28. She doesn't have children. She's Jewish, as Melissa and Irene were, but she doesn't belong to a synagogue, and was active in the Jewish community in college, but less so today. She has a household income of $85,000, and she's very active digitally. She's on Twitter and Instagram. She uses dating app messaging platforms like GChat and WhatsApp, and prefers text over email. But I think an important note about her communication habits, she may be enticed to open an email based on the subject line. Nonprofit giving, I think, is an important piece to talk about with someone like Jenna and her main motivators. She's most motivated by her peers. So with Jenna, when you're thinking about section members or people active in your communities that are around Jenna's age, she's motivated by what her peers are talking about and what her peers are motivated by. And then, of course, she has, her own issue areas that she's inspired by. And lastly, she's familiar with NCJW, something important to note because her grandmother is a section member. So I should have said this at the beginning, but one of the things that we'll be doing in the breakout today is taking each of these audience groups and assigning them based on our breakout rooms. And you'll be imagining an engagement journey from communication all the way through to fundraising. And Liz will cover that for each of these audiences.
Great, thanks, Erica. I just wanted to address a couple of things that have come up in the chat. So someone asked about where we got this information on these three people. And I want to just reiterate that these were folks that we made up. They're not real people. When Erica and I first started working with NCJW, we went through an audience profile brainstorm. So these three women were created with the national organization in mind. So again, I want to just reiterate that these are meant to be profiles. They are meant to represent very specific people, but as you're in your breakout groups and when you take this information and you build your profiles for your own section, you will be creating people that make the most sense for your section specifically. So the idea here is to really get a clear idea of who you want to target, who you want to talk to in your message, and who you are ultimately trying to engage in the virtual space. So you can even begin to imagine how the engagement journey of these three different women look really different, right? Based on their habits, based on their interests, based on where you think they're going to be most compelled by the work that you do. And in terms of, someone asked about wealth capacity. So again, this is largely made up based on what we imagined. So we took a look at what level of donation we were hoping these folks would be able to make. And we sort of tailored their, the idea of their household income and their nonprofit giving around that. Of course, there are tools that you can use, capacity screening and things like that. But these, again, these were largely imagined. And one of the things I'm going to talk about as I talk about the engagement journey is determining what your goal for these folks are. And again, as you go profile to profile, they may look a little bit different. So as Erica mentioned, we're going to assign, when we break into breakout groups, we're going to assign you a profile. We talked a little bit about, before the session began, probably Irene and Melissa are the closest to the folks that you will be engaging in your sections. Jenna feels like a little bit of an outlier, and I think for some of you, a little bit more of a stretch, right? The people that you want to engage down the line. So I want to just encourage you to consider Jenna in your work, but specifically for the purposes of this breakout, we will be assigning Irene and Melissa to the different groups. We wanted to let Jenna be an opt-in. So if any of you would like to work on Jenna when we use the breakout room function, if you could put that in the chat now, Samantha will be assigning the groups when we do the breakout rooms, and she can put together a group of folks who want to work on Jenna. So I just wanted to point that out. If you would like to have more Jennas in your section and imagine what it looks like to engage with Jennas, please put that in the chat and we will put you all in a group together. Otherwise, you will be assigned either Irene or Melissa. Samantha, did I get that right? Is there anything else you want them to know about the breakouts at this point?
That's it. Just write in the chat if you want to be in that group and I will make sure you get there.
Okay, great. So the next thing we're going to talk about is just what is a fundraising journey. And we imagine, actually, Lindsay, if you want to just go to the next slide, we'll jump right in. Great. So the way that we often talk about the journey is in the idea of this engagement funnel. So you'll see various illustrations of this as you're talking about marketing, as you're talking about fundraising. It's often used as a sales model, all of the ways that we imagine folks are engaging with our organization, right? So from the top of the funnel, where people are just finding out about you, the reason that that's wide is because it represents the most number of people, right? The most number of people who may just casually hear about your section, you know, probably in your geographic area, or they know about you for one reason or another. And then as you engage with them and they engage with you and you deepen your relationship, you sort of move them down this funnel. And the reason it gets smaller is that, you know, those numbers decrease as you move down. So you will always have people that start at awareness and don't move any further. And you will always have people that move to interest and don't move any further. But the idea of the engagement funnel is to bring people further along in their journey with your section. So just to go through each step here, and thank you, Judith. Judith wants to work with Jenna. I'm very excited. Who wants to join Judith? I'm going to sell Jenna as we go through on this. No, so awareness is really just sort of hearing about your section, right? Someone, how are they finding out about you? Interest is when they express an interest. So that's the sort of next step of them reaching back out to you to say, hey, I'd like some more information. They're following you on social media. Maybe they sign up for your email newsletter, whatever that looks like. Evaluation is the process by which they're feeling you out. They're getting to know you. Maybe they come to a meeting. You know, they attend a webinar, something. You're engaging with them in some way, but they have actively said, listen, this is an organization that I want to know more about. I want to be involved, that kind of thing. The decision point is, in this case, because we're talking about digital fundraising, the point at which they make an online donation. So this is the place, I think, where we can talk about how much is that donation? How do they make it? You know, the kind of specifics of what you'd like that online gift to look like, and maybe it's the first one that they give. The Journey 2.0 is what we imagine your sort of long-term goal with this person is. So if the decision point is the point at which they make their first online donation. Journey 2.0 can be a repeated donation, a major gift, a monthly recurring gift. It doesn't also always have to involve money. The Journey 2.0 can be, they host now a virtual party for you. They tell their friends about you. They bring more people to your section. So that's sort of maybe they become a leader in your section, right? So it's the point at which that they're going beyond that donation to really commit to the organization and be part of your ongoing work with long-time growth in mind. Sometimes we find, and Erica and I have done this, a million different ways with a million different clients, but sometimes we find that actually imagining what the Journey 2.0 looks like first is a great way, and then sort of going back to the beginning and imagining how they got there is a really nice way to build out these journeys. So I think the next slide is examples. If we could go there, maybe I can talk a little bit about that. I'm sorry, it's not examples. It's why is this important? But so I think, if you imagine what their Journey 2.0 looks like, it helps you sort of start at the beginning. Here's the example slide. Sorry about that. Thanks, Lindsay, for keeping up with me. So if the journey, a couple of examples of the Journey 2.0 here are, they make a monthly recurring donation. So if they commit to something like $18 or $36 a month for the long term. They host a virtual happy hour, right? Meaning that they want to share their experience with your section, with their network, with their friends, with other folks in their community. So you can see how this extends beyond just that one-time online donation. And while we're here, we might as well go through the other examples. So then what I would do is go back up to awareness and again, imagine how they got there. So that awareness stage starts with peer-to-peer. They hear about you from a friend. They see it on a friend's social media, right? Or there's a local newspaper article about your thrift store and they see it there and they think like, oh, I didn't know that there was a section of NCJW here in my community. So really, first time they hear about you. Interest is they sign up for email and they get your newsletter, or they start following you on your social media and they engage with a post, they like it, or they commented on it. They somehow then, the two-way connection has begun, right? They've expressed their interest in you. Evaluation, as I said, maybe they attend a virtual event, they receive a fundraising email, but they don't necessarily donate, right? So this is the point at which they're deciding, how involved with this organization do I want to be? How much do I care about the success of this organization? Am I going to start contributing financially? Decision, again, the point at which they make the donation, and the Journey 2.0, deepening of their engagement. So now if we can go back to why is this important? I think the biggest thing that we consider, one of the biggest things we consider here, and as we work with largely nonprofit organizations, is priorities and resources, right? You don't have unlimited time, you don't have unlimited funds. You really want to make the best use of what you do have. And that is to get really specific. So this sounds a little counterintuitive. When you're doing online fundraising, you think, well, anyone could donate to my section, right? Anyone could donate to NCJW. But actually, if you imagine, okay, how are you going to reach anyone? If you have to reach everyone, you will use considerably more resources than if you try to narrow down who and how. You can sort of figure out how you prioritize. The idea, I'm sorry, Erica.
The other thing is that if you figure out who you're prioritizing, you might get to very quickly the most likely to make a donation. And so once you have those people donating on a regular basis or completing the Journey 2.0 that you have a vision, then you can start profiling and messaging to that next generation of like, okay, they're the second most likely to make a donation. And that way you're using your resources as smartly as possible, like Liz said.
Great. And I think the other thing we sort of like to drive home with these engagement journeys is that a lot of times donation and fundraising in general can't just feel transactional, right? So you really need to work on the idea of building a relationship with these folks, multiple touch points, the idea of cultivation and stewardship. So not just asking them, not just making it feel like a one-way street where you need them, but also that, you know, they need you and you're partners in this and you're working together. So that's something even as simple as sending out an e-newsletter that doesn't have a hard ask in it, right? Just providing them with information, making them feel like the work you do is valuable, and understanding what your relationship looks like beyond financial. And then this goes along with priority and resources, but the idea of group communication. So especially now that we are all living in this virtual space, and I know that a lot of your in-person touch points have changed and look really different. You know, the idea of how do you reach the most amount of people online versus, you know, having an event where you're sort of inviting folks in the door. What does it look like to move your journey online and communicate with a lot of people all at once? Anything else you want to add here, Erica?
Well, I just want to make sure before we get into breakouts, Susan asked a really great question that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds about, you know, even if you have donors with capacity in your sections, they're not likely to make a donation, whether it's high level or even $100. She said we have to struggle to get women to each donate $100 toward Israel granting. And I'm sure that this is something that a lot of you are facing. So, you know, when you're imagining your audiences, perhaps these ones aren't perfect targets for your sections, but you'll want to do what Liz talked about, imagining sort of journey 2.0, or perhaps it's the decision. You don't want to say, okay, we're looking for 5 $18,000 gifts. You want to be realistic to who your audience is and the action that they will take. So maybe it's an $18 donation as the decision point, and making it a recurring $18 donation as the journey 2.0. The point and the beauty of making these target audiences is that you get to know who they are truly and can imagine what action would they actually take, with the idea that you'll over time grow your donor base and eventually make it to those larger gifts. What do you think, Liz?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Great. So now I think we're going to get into our breakout rooms and take a look at what this might look like in practice. So I think we have 9 groups. And Samantha, does that include Jenna? Do we have a group for Jenna?
That excludes Jenna.
Excludes Jenna.
In addition to Jenna.
Great. So when Samantha puts you into your breakout room, one thing is you will so a little thing will pop up on your screen that says join a breakout room, and you'll have to accept that. And then you'll go into a breakout room with different members of this, different attendees. And you will see at the top of your screen, it will say you are in breakout room number, and it will have number 1 through 9. So let's say that groups 1 through, let's see if I can do this. 1 through 5 are going to imagine the digital fundraising journey for Irene, and breakout groups 6 through 9 will imagine the digital fundraising journey for Melissa. So
6 through 9.
Is that right, Samantha? Anything else before they get into the groups? I think, and then there will be a 10th group who's going to work on Jenna. Is that right? So if you're in breakout room number 10, you'll be using the Jenna profile. So the idea here, once you're in your room, is really just to build a digital fundraising journey from awareness to journey 2.0 for the person that you're talking about. So Irene, Melissa, or Jenna. One thing to keep in mind is to really be specific. So if you say something like, they see us on Facebook, you can say something like, they see a Facebook post that a friend posted about our thrift store. Or you can say something like, they read in the local newspaper that we have done a community drive for backpacks for back to school, right? So something, just be really specific. And again, I know it sounds a little counterintuitive because you don't want to, because you imagine all of the different ways, but it is really helpful to get specific and really think about the ways that they have engaged. So what was the subject of the webinar they attended, right? How much is the donation and how was it solicited? So be as specific as possible. So we're gonna break out into these rooms for about 10 minutes. And Erica and I will pop in and out if all goes well. So if you have any questions, you can also use the raise your hand function and we will find you. Anything else, Samantha or Lindsay, before we get started with breakout rooms?
I think that's it. I'm going to open them now.
It was not very much time.
I know that 10 minutes goes
We
quick.
didn't get anywhere. I mean, seriously, we had, after we read the bio on the person, we kind of had like 5 minutes left.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can review as a group. So that's a great segue. So thank you all for working in those groups. I know they probably went quickly and you were just sort of learning about these folks and imagining what they might look like within your section. So, you know, I'm sure you did great work, but any and all work you did is wonderful. So we would love to just hear from a couple of you, spend the next 5 minutes or so talking through what you imagined or some of the engagements that you thought these folks would look like. So Judith from Chicago, thank you, excellent, has volunteered to share. Judith, what, if you want to unmute, please go ahead and share. Did you have Irene, Melissa, or Jenna, just to start so we all know?
I'm sorry, your question was, we had Lindsay?
No, which of the audience profiles?
Oh, I'm sorry, Jenna.
Jenna. Okay,
Jenna.
great.
And yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
No, wonderful. Please, do you want to share what Jenna's journey looks like?
Sure. I've worked in, my background is in education and working with students in and faculty in a community college environment. So I've always been comfortable working with the younger generation, and I know that's where the energy is. So Jenna's profile appealed to me because I think this is a way for us to learn. It's this younger generation who is out there doing what we should have done many, many years ago. So this is not the quiet generation. This is the generation that is going to demand change. And so for me, in my mind, change is the name of the game. And when I hear the words, you know, we're going to turn back to normal, I'm thinking, I hope not. I don't want it to. Turning back to normal, we're going to be back where we are. So to me, it's this younger generation that is going to embrace this change. And we even talked about embracing Zoom. I mean, initially I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? So now is our chance to think creatively and working beyond our physical boundaries.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. So just wanted to go through just a couple steps on the engagement journey with Jenna. So how did you imagine Jenna first hears about you or first hears about your section?
I think we're a big believer in word of mouth, and one person connects with another person. Yep. I don't see the printed word doing you know, newspapers and magazines. We don't think that's the name of the game.
Yep, I think that's probably right, especially for Jenna. If she hears from it from a friend, hears about it from a friend, it's probably online.
Yeah. I even saw a book club being held on Instagram the other day.
Very cool, yeah.
So there's it's pretty endless. So we bring Jenna in. We even talked about the appeal of monthly giving. And don't get me wrong, these ideas are not uniquely mine. I lurk everywhere that I'm able to. So I'm always looking at women's leadership conferences, philanthropy. Those are my two big interests.
Great.
So yeah, so and we learn from, you know, I belong to another group here in Chicago, and so what I've learned there I could bring in here and vice versa. So we talked about bringing Jenna in and explaining the beauty of monthly giving. And I'm reading this from another letter that I just received this morning. Why give monthly? What is the appeal of giving monthly? Sustained support, affordable impact, and convenient giving. So when you say $200, it's overwhelming. But when you say $20 a month, it's much more palatable, right?
Yeah, I think that's right, especially for a younger person. I think that we're all very accustomed to this idea now of the subscription model, right? You pay your Hulu monthly and you pay your Spotify monthly. And so the idea of philanthropic giving on that same monthly basis is something that a lot of organizations are embracing, especially at those lower dollar levels. So if it's $5 a month or $18 a month, really sort of just, you know, putting it on a person's credit card and letting it roll from there. I think you're absolutely right. It sounds a little bit less intimidating than maybe.
You know what else happens? So $20 someday turns into $20,000. So for those folks who don't know much about the organization but want to get involved in women and leadership, it's all about emotional attachment.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's exactly right.
All about emotional attachment. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Did someone who had Irene or Melissa, so someone from groups 1 through 5, is there someone who wants to share with us a little bit about what your engagement journey looked like? Say, let's start with Irene. Who worked with Irene and who would like to share a little bit? Please just feel free to unmute, and then other folks from your group can weigh in maybe via chat.
This is Sylvia. One of the things we talked about with Irene was finding the difficulty of just having her join and hitting her up immediately for donations. But we thought that given some of her background and given her capacity, at least as stated on the profile there, and her interests in reproductive rights, reproductive justice, and so on, that if there was a particular project that she could be approached and, you know, we could talk to her about a major gift or some type of backing for a particular project that she may be unaware of. We thought that for initially reaching out to her, friending her on Facebook, trying to find people who do know her, make mutual connections, and then begin to engage her with what we're doing and let her know the kind of projects and certainly convey that they are a match for her interests.
Yeah, that sounds exactly right. One of the things we have been talking about, because we're living our lives online now, especially, and I think a lot of what you're talking about is sort of one-on-one cultivation, and potentially what could that look like in the virtual space. A lot of our clients and a lot of people we're working with are simply just moving those like coffee dates and lunch dates and things like that online using Zoom. I mean, I know it's not ideal and it's not everyone's favorite, but I do think it's a thing that it's a tool that folks are using that's really helpful. The other thing is, I would say, is with the digital fundraising journeys in particular, and when we talk about priorities and resources and different forms of communication, for someone like Irene, who does have a capacity to give at a higher dollar amount down the line, chances are her first gift is not going to be a major gift, right? It might be if there's enough of a warm connection, if you feel like she truly understands the work that you're doing, you might move her to a major gift. But I would encourage you to think of all of the Irenes out there, right? All of the folks who fit that profile, who might be on your email list, who might be on your social media channels, and think about talking to all of them all at once, and sort of engaging that first sort of two-way communication, right? So rather than hoping that you know someone who knows someone who can introduce you to Irene, which is great, that's ideal. But you might not, and you might not even be aware of Irene, right, until she gets in touch with you. So I would just think a little more broadly about also how do you reach all of the Irenes out there, right? What techniques and tools are you using as well? That's great. And I think that Sarah from New York is going to share with us about Melissa. Sarah, do you want to unmute and tell us a little bit about your engagement journey with Melissa?
Sure. So we didn't, I had some technical issues and I jumped in right at the end. And so I don't know if that's what we spoke about, but we talked about some of our other fundraising initiatives amongst the group. And I just wanted to sort of say like a couple of things. So I'm the director of development at NCJW, one of the few that has professional staff. And I think there's a couple things that I feel like made me a little nervous is that I'm not seeing things that on these profiles that indicate their affinity to giving. Like they may be interested in reproductive rights, or they may be interested in this or that. But, you know, and I have some suggestions about figuring out who you know is to use something like relationship science. There's a very cheap way to see who's connected to who. You can do that through Facebook. You can look at opensecrets.org to find out political giving. You can search the word annual report and the name that you're looking for. And that can help you decide whether or not they're going to give. And I just felt like that was really missing from the profile, that you're never going to get all of this information. But the I think important things to know are what's their capacity, what's their affinity to our work, and what is their inclination to be charitable. And those that tend to make small gifts like 25, you know, I would look at Irene as a good planned giving prospect because she's a widow. She doesn't have kids. Those are things that we want. When Irene is gone, we want that $1 million from her. So there's different ways to think about giving them moving up, and different ways to figure out if you're going to ask someone for a gift, because without knowing if they are a philanthropic person, whether or not they care about, you know, protesting for women's rights, that's not going to matter if they're not willing to give because they don't believe in charity, whatever. That's not likely, but it happens. I just wanted to put that out there.
Can I ask a question in relationship to what you were talking about?
Sure.
So we have a few people who are generous and we know have the capacity to give, but we often feel like we don't know quite what a good way to engage them to take their giving to the next level, or not to feel like they're being asked again and again. And if there are any suggestions for that, I'd appreciate it. Or any thoughts about that?
So I can't see a full screen. Sorry, this is Panina Barr from Essex. Oh, now I lost completely.
I can hear you, Panina.
Oh, sorry, I lost you guys for a second. I see nothing, but if you can hear me, that's great. So we have something called the High Circle at Essex County section. And what that basically, that's addressing your asking again and again. So we have different levels of giving to the organization, starting at 5,000 and going, oh God, maybe up as high as 50,000, if not higher. And each level gets you certain privileges within the organization. So therefore, you don't have to continuously ask them over and over. That's one way we've sort of eliminated that. And, you know, with each year, we try to have conversations with our high donors to, you know, increase them to the next level. The other thing we do, which is part of our High Circle program, but I guess can be used in other ways, we sort of offer people the opportunity to underwrite something. And although their money may not be specifically going to that event, you know, we're able to use it as a way to get them to give at a higher level. And, you know, announcing them either at the program or in our program that we have, you know, say this event was made possible by the, you know, generous support of Mr. and Mrs. or so-and-so and so-and-so. So that's a way that we've gotten people sort of to a higher level and giving in addition to what they may not have given.
Thank you.
going back to Melissa, who we never discussed, we just talked, and I'll just talk for a minute, I'm Jan Schwartz. We talked a lot about engagement because I think both sides of the coin are important. If you don't engage people, they're not going to want to give you money. Then once they're engaged, you can go to the model of how to engage them financially. But we talked like because you did a generational picture for us for people my age, people our kids' age, and people maybe younger. And I think at every age, NCJW has programs where people can engage and get invested, even if they're busy working moms. And so don't forget the engagement piece, because you're not going to get them to give money if they're not engaged, although it's important to remember people can be engaged and not be givers or not be able to afford. So you have to be working on both sides. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really important. And Erica's just going to do a little bit of wrap up. And I think one of the keys here that you're touching on is the idea of mass communication versus one-on-one. And I think that's a lot of what we can do in the digital space versus, in an in-person event. You have a lot more opportunity for one-on-one cultivation and stewardship. And when we're talking about digital and we're talking about online giving, the idea of wrapping in as many people as possible is really helpful. And so thank you for that reminder. Erica, do you want to just talk a little bit about, how this might apply to different sections?
Sure. So I think actually Judith just chatted this, it needs to be a part of the mission and goals. And I think one of the things that you want to keep in mind when you start applying this is, there was a lot of conversation around individual appeals and how to attract those higher level donors. But I think when you're talking from a digital perspective and casting a wide net, what you want to think about is, like Judith said, how it's connecting to your mission and how it's connecting to your goals. So you can take these target audiences that are really just samples and will help you wrap your arms around what you're asking, what type of person to say, and create your messaging. And so what messaging is are basically your talking points, but you'll be using them digitally rather than one-on-one in this instance. They are talking points, and we'll be sharing a worksheet on how to create your messages that are related to fundraising. You'll create these messages and then imagine all of the places that you'll use them, and that's what your journeys are for. You'll be using them in Facebook posts, maybe emails, all of these different ways that you are engaging with the types of audiences. So we have a worksheet that'll help you create your messages. You'll put them in the places that you're outlining in your journeys. So you'll put them in email, Facebook, Twitter, all of the different places that you may communicate. And when it comes to the who, you'll be imagining the audiences that'll be motivated by them. So in some of the breakout rooms that I jumped in, we talked about, if someone is most interested in talking about how to address human trafficking, if you're hosting a webinar on human trafficking, your next fundraising appeal messaging might say something like, we make differences when it comes to human trafficking by doing X, Y, and Z. Will you make a donation to make that difference? And this came in a little bit about the target audiences, but you'll want to take a look at, this has come up a few different ways, that people have a lot of capacity, but they may be donating other ways or to other organizations, or you might be considering them for a later in life gift. But you want to think about what is the right ask. So who they are and what the goal actually is. So if they have a lot of capacity but haven't made a donation, maybe you're making the wrong ask. Maybe they fall into the category of an online appeal of asking for an $18 gift. And then the next ask would be for a recurring donation. So you'll think about what the messaging is, to who, and what is going to motivate them to action. So that was a roundabout way of saying we've got the who, what, when, where, why, and how, and all of these will help get you to the mass communication digital fundraising ask that I think will over time make a big difference in online fundraising.
Great, thanks. So we're at time, and I know you all have busy lives and busy schedules, so I don't want to take too much of your time. So Emily's just going to give us a little bit of a wrap up here, but I am available to stay for a few minutes for questions after Emily Emily finishes up. And so if anyone wants to stay and ask questions one-on-one, we're happy to chat for a few more minutes. But thank you all so much for joining. Please feel free, you know, as Erica said, you're going to get these resources, the persona building workshop. You have the blank journey map that we just used and the messaging worksheet. So I really encourage you to sort of think about how all of these things can apply to your own work in your own sections. But thank you so much for being here. And like I said, we'll stick around for a few minutes as well.
Okay, thank you so much. As you mentioned, Liz, that's all the time we have today. Thank you to everyone for joining us to learn about donor engagement and journey mapping. The recording of this webinar will be shared over the next few days with everyone who registered, and it will be posted on the website along with the resources for training. Please take a moment, if you have a moment, to complete the survey on your screen about this webinar. Your feedback is important for us as we plan our future training sessions. If you have any constructive feedback, please email Samantha Weil at sweil@ncjw.org. Be sure to join NCJW tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time at a special event promoting the vote, Protecting the Vote, a conversation with Stacey Abrams. She's a voting rights activist and founder of Fair Fight Action. I'm very excited about that. Register today to hear from Stacey about how far we have come and what more we need to do to ensure access to the ballot in November. After the discussion, join us for a pre-screening of the film All In, The Fight for Democracy. The film screening does we may be screaming, but the film screening does require an additional registration. On Tuesday, September 29th at 5:30 p.m., please join us, also Eastern Time, for Staying in the Fight for Racial Justice, a conversation with Yavila McCoy and Eric Ward. They will discuss meaningful ways to advance racial equity and how this work intersects with combating anti-Semitism. Save the date also for networking in the virtual Sukkah on Monday, October 5th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time and 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time to meet NCJW leaders from across the national network who are in similar roles to your own, to share ideas and to discuss any burning questions you may have. Check out our website for the full schedule of our NCJ webinar leadership series through November. Thank you again to Liz and Erica for sharing their expertise with us today. And thank you to all of you for joining us. Stay safe and healthy. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Again, the speakers will stay online if anyone has any additional questions. Nice to see everybody.
Thank you, Emily.
I have a quick question.
Please.
Hi, it's Panina again. I just have a quick question about the recurring gifts because we're trying that. So how long do you keep a person, like, do you wait out the year and then approach them for something bigger or greater, or can you do it?
So are you talking about from the time that they give their first gift to asking them for a recurring gift?
Yeah, so like we do a special gifts campaign, so that'll go out shortly, and I think this might be our first time like officially rolling it out. So there's an option to do a one-time gift or a recurring gift.
Sure.
So if the person clicks on the recurring gift of say $18 a month.
Yep.
At what point, I mean, you assume that's going to go for the year, right? Or your hope is that they don't stop it before the year. But at what point is it like the best practice or good practice to maybe follow up with them and encourage them to give more, or do you wait it out the year, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of my answers sort of depends on your sophistication with segmenting email. So one thing I would recommend, if you can, is to move all of your monthly recurring donors into one segment in email, so that as you're sending out other fundraising messages to your whole email list, that you're treating those people separately. So you're either sending them a slightly softer ask, or you're acknowledging the fact that they are already monthly recurring donors, and you could they might add a gift to their annual contribution, so that they're not getting the same messages over and over that everyone else is getting as you're doing other fundraising. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
sort of separating them out and treating them as their own path, especially via email, as you're doing your other fundraising. If you can do that, I think that then it makes sense, you know, maybe once a quarter or something like that, to send them, again, depending on your natural sort of cadence of emails and how much you do this fundraising asking. But you know, something like once a quarter, sending those folks a special email that says, you're a monthly recurring donor. We could not do this without your sustaining support. Could you give an extra X amount of dollars this year? You know, sort of asking them for a larger one-time gift, and then evaluating, you know, who's doing that, what level of gift are they making, that kind of thing.
Great. Thank you so much.
Erica, do you have anything else you would say?
No, I think that you've covered it. You know, I think one thing that we've sort of touched on today is that you have to come at it from a really wide perspective, and that's challenging when you're more used to, like, you know, exactly how long do you wait, and with a major donor or a personal connection, that's easier to outline. But what Liz outlined is a really great way to approach sort of the mass appeal.
Great. Thank you so much.
So I have a question. So you're talking about digital fundraising. So we're talking mostly about Facebook or Instagram fundraising.
And
Okay.
email. I think email is a large component of what we're talking about.
Oh, okay. Because
So
how do you break up people? So we have to have really email groups by interest, or basically in the office, which we don't really have.
Not necessarily. I mean, I think that the idea is you have an email list, right? So everyone who is, sorry?
Everyone who's on email, which is another problem. We're working on that.
Right, sure. I mean, that's sort of part of this, is that you're targeting folks who are online, who are used to being online.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that an online gift really is anyone who gives literally online. So you're finding them on email, you're finding them on social. They could be coming from, you know, a display ad, something like that, probably a little less likely in your case. But I think that, so when you're talking about email, I think what you're saying is that you have your list segmented by interest area.
No, we don't. I'm saying it's not segmented at all, except by officers. So
that's okay. So when you're sending, actually what we're talking about is the idea of how can you develop language, how can you develop messages, how can you develop a fundraising ask that actually does hold some appeal for all of the different people that are on your email list, right? So when you describe something like reproductive justice, are you talking to Irene? Are you talking to Melissa? Or are you talking to Jenna? You will probably talk about that same issue in different ways based on who you're talking to. But if you only have one large email list and you don't really know who's on it, and it's not segmented by issue area or by source or the way that, you know, they've found your organization, what's most helpful, I think, is to vary the way that you talk about certain issues so that you're attracting different folks at different times.
Mm-hmm.